Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday, November the 11th, and this is America Some Assembly Required. Today, Anna is not going to be able to join us. She has had some other meetings that she's had to attend, so it's just us today. I wanted to continue the discussion that we started last week in terms of committees, because there still seems to be some questions about committees swirling around. And, you know, with those questions, it makes it sometimes contentious or difficult on our assemblies to move forward. And so the first thing I want to tell you is that we govern by committee. There is no one person in charge. We have lots of guides. We have lots of help. We have all those things. We have people who keep us organized and move us forward in the form of chairpersons for our committees, chairmen for our assemblies. But it's really the job of the committees to actually do the work, to come up with the solutions, to put together our documents, our processes, to actually help and suggest as we go along how our assemblies are going to be actually operating going forward. So those committees become extremely important, as we talked about last week. And again, in the committee process, it really takes, we have certain standing committees. Those are the committees that are basically the everyday basic committees or categories of our assembly. Communications, operations, could be education, orientation, treasury. All of those things are what we call the basic committees, of which there are 26 basic committees, are all the standing committees. So in order to stand our assemblies, those are the committees that have to be there to actually operate. Now, is that the be-all, end-all of committees? No. Because as we grow, we're going to find that we're going to have other committees to put in place. We're also going to find that with the committees, some of those committees have subcommittees to them. One of the examples I gave recently was the Records Committee. And the question is, who creates the records? Well, it's the recording secretaries. And the recording secretaries get together as a committee. They make sure that they're using good process, answering each other's questions, solving any problems, but they're basically a committee, your recording secretaries. And then you have in the records committee, you might have a group that takes and files all of the records. The records keeper needs help. And they have a committee that comes in and files and puts away the records and organizes and things. And so then you have those that might come in and audit the work. We always want to make sure we've got checks and balances going on, that we didn't miss something along the way, that everything's organized in the correct way, put in the right place, accounted for in those ways. And then you think about under records, we have digital records, we have administrative records. All of those things have their place in their category. And it could be, as we grow, there could be committees that handle each one of those areas. Okay, so that's just an example of a committee and subcommittees. The subcommittees are there again to do the work. And so they're there to take and say, okay, how are we doing? Is there anything that we need? Unlike our de facto that says, how are we doing and how can we spend money? Our committees are there to try to say, how are we doing and what do we need to do? What needs to be done? Here's our hands and let's get busy. And that takes each and every one of us. If you're not actively involved in your assembly, then there's some small job you can do, even if it's only for a half hour or an hour a week, to get involved. Okay. And committees are the great way to do that. Now, as we grow, we're not meant to be in session or have our committees going 52 weeks out of the year. Eventually, you'll get to a point once you kind of get your business together and you know what you're doing and you've got all of your whatever documents or processes or any of those things that are done, everything's just kind of moving along and it's just humming along. You're going to be able to back off of having a committee meeting every week or every 2 weeks. Maybe it's only once a month. And so, realize that joining a committee, many hands make light work. So, I've had some kind of crazy ideas come up. I've had people who said, "Oh, we need to vet committee members. Oh, we just can't let anybody on a committee." And my answer is that our assemblies, our committees and our assemblies need to grow organically. They're going to come out of the desire to want to help and to learn. And there's no better way to learn than to join a committee, because you're going to be focused on a topic. You're going to be asked to do research on that topic, provide your opinion, your experience on that topic, and then maybe even actually have to work in that area on that topic. So there's no better way to learn than to get involved and get embedded into a committee. Now, to begin with, we probably only want about 9 people on a committee. You don't want 70 people on a committee because then you become sometimes log jammed. Does that mean that you can't have 70 people on a committee? Absolutely not. But what it does mean is that while we're small and we're operating, we're going to learn to operate our assemblies through our committees, and we can take that work and put it into little compartments or sections. And you might have 25 to 30 people working in and cross-working in some of those committees. But the work has to get done. And it's up to us. As Anna says, it's up to us chickens. We're the only ones here, right? And so joining a committee is nothing more than raising your hand. And once you're on the committee, being not just sitting, not just listening, okay, it's actually participating in the committee, making your opinion known, making your research available, doing the wealth of whatever it is that you have to bring, being an asset to your assembly. That's what committee work is, okay? And sometimes we don't always agree. I mean, somebody might bring up a topic within your committee, and you've either done that, been there, done that, tried it, didn't work. And you have that experience to lend and say, I don't quite agree with that. And here's why I don't agree with it. All right. I will tell you the most unproductive ways of running your committee is saying, well, I don't agree with that. And leaving the conversation lay right there. Okay. Because we all have opinions. And in a committee, we really it's needed that we give the reason, give a research, give a fact, give something, okay, to substantiate where our position is. So this is where we've been talking about the spirit of debate in our committees. It's not a debate to be contentious or to be obtuse, resistant to an idea. It's about what does good prudence and good learning, good research, and maybe good experience lend to the situation, right? So we have to begin to look at our committees and in the work that they're doing. And everybody goes, well, I don't really know exactly how to direct it. Well, once you get into it and you start just an open discussion with your committee, what do we need to do? How are we going to do it? What is the timeline on doing these things? Are they immediate or are they something that's future? Is it something our assembly desperately needs right now? What kind of resources do we need to accomplish it? Do we need money? Do we need a budget? Do we need an outside expert? Do we need research? Okay, everybody, let's go research this in different directions. You take the Library of Congress. I'll go out and I'll do this. Well, it just really depends on whatever the subject is. And so, in that, we begin to really get into the committee work. And again, I've advocated many times about asking the questions. Who's going to do it? What do we need? What is it that we need done? When are we going to do this? Maybe where do we find some of these resources? How are we going to accomplish it in the time frame that we have? And how are we going to accomplish it with the few people that we have? Which is why it's important for each man or woman to take their talents and their gifts to give to and attend a committee. Now, we raise our hand for committees, but we also have to be willing to be regular and committed to the committee. It's not something that we can just bounce in and bounce out of as we choose. If we decide that we're going to be a committee member, then we have to actively be that committee member. Otherwise, we lose track of where everybody else is. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a committee and somebody who hasn't been there for a few months comes in and they go, well, can you catch me up? I think we ought to do this. Yeah, we already talked about that. That's not going to work for us. And we talked about that at length. Well, can you catch me up? And that makes your committee go backwards for a while instead of forwards. So if we're going to be good committee members, we've got to take and really embrace the idea that we're going to be the asset. We're not going to be the stone wall that everybody has to jump over the top of. And that's how you move your committees really forward in their work. And everybody gets in and they start really working to those details. You decide what your agenda is going to be for the year, what you want to accomplish, and then you tackle the issues sometimes as they come up and go back to the issues that you've identified that are the work of your session. So typically, this is the time of the year that we are all looking at if we're going to stay on a committee, if we want to be a chair of a committee, and for the next year, because our committees run in year cycles. So they start in January, end in December. And chairmanships of our committees, they start in January and they end in December. Now, it doesn't mean they end, right? You can be a chairman multiple times, multiple years. There's no time limit on how long you as long as your committee votes you into that place. And December is the time to do that, is to vote your committee chairs. And I find that it's really interesting that so many people are a little bit squeamish about being a committee chair. Oh, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I have skills enough. Well, we'll go over again the job of a committee chair. Committee chair is making sure that the business is getting done. That's the major description, right? And how do they do that? Well, they do that by making sure that there's a meeting on the regular meeting schedule and that they're calling the meeting and getting the information or the meeting information out to the members of the committee. That they're adding any of the names to the list so that they get the email to attend the committee. And so they kind of run the meeting. They could have, if it's a large group, they could have somebody who also acts as meeting moderator. But often the chairman keeps the business of the meeting moving. They might put an agenda together. Why are we meeting? What is the purpose in the meeting, right? We all hate meetings that have no purpose, right? So we want to make sure that we're always working towards accomplishing something in our committees. We're working on a project. We're working on future information. We're working on a notice. We might be working on a list or something that the assembly really needs. So as a chairman, you're just making sure that those things, and maybe you send out the meeting recording or you have it sent out. Maybe you're making transcripts or documents or prior meeting minutes available, just to keep everybody up on the right speed. Okay. But it's all about making the assembly move forward. And if the committee chair can't be there, maybe there's somebody that would step up and just help guide the meeting. But the most important thing is that once we get our committees up, that we don't stop. We can't just wait because one person can't make it, right? We are all in charge. Remember that question? Who's in charge? We are. And we have to embrace that dedication to our assemblies and our committees to say, okay, so-and-so couldn't make it today. So last week we talked about this. Let's continue on that path. And so we all need to pitch in that way with our committees. The committees are like sitting around the family table. This is what Anna means by when she says our committees are more like the family dinner table. So we sit around, we discuss. When I was a kid, my dad every evening at dinner, after dinner, much to sometimes my mother's chagrin, would throw out a topic. And he'd throw it out there. Sometimes it was controversial. Sometimes it was just a process of logic. Sometimes it was just an event of the day. Sometimes it was a problem. Sometimes it was just information. What do you think about that? And that's the way our committees work, is we throw out whatever it is that we should be either working on or discussing. Some of our meetings are just discussion. We learn in those discussions. Everybody brings their piece of the puzzle to those discussions. Things they've read, things they know, things they've learned over their lifetime. And they lend that into the discussion of the committees. Those discussions lead into action. What are we going to do with that information? And then we move forward. Incidentally, this is no different on the state or on the county than it is on the state. So our counties need to begin to talk. Maybe not time to form committees quite yet, but at least they need to learn to talk and have that opening discussion so that when they get to the point where they're setting up committees, they're familiar with each other, they're bringing people in, they're knowledgeable about topics, and the discussion kind of helps prime the pump, right? So that in time we can move forward when it's time to do committees and counties. Now, Anna a couple weeks ago said counties need to wait. States need to get up first. And again, the discussion on that is, first of all, you can't do international business through a county. It's got to come through the state. So whatever your needs are internationally are handled by our state. We don't go the de facto with it, okay? We have to go to our state assembly. And so our protection, our authority, all flows through the state assembly. Try that at the county level and you're going to get smacked down. And it could be a very serious smackdown without the authority of the state behind you and the state court. So it's really vital. Anna's talked a lot about that lately. And we have to really begin to meet and begin to get to know each other and talk about the topics that are at hand so that we can go help our state and get our states situated so we can get our counties up, right? It's going to be a much easy proposition to flow some of that business from the state to the counties, having the state decide the models of which we're going to be able to administer our state and then administer our counties. So if you go back into the first, say, under 10 episodes of America Some Assembly Required, you're going to find the lists of the committees, on what the standing committees are. And as we went through and worked through each pillar, what their standing committees are. So those are just the general overall topics of committees. But it doesn't mean that we can't set up other committees. At some point, we may want a medical committee, something that's going to deal with, maybe it's sound healing, maybe it's med beds, maybe it's naturopathic methods, homeopathic therapies. All of those things are categories under a health committee. And what we're going to do within our community, how we're going to affect that. We've talked this morning on Ohio, just in a general kind of town hall chit chat group of the assembly. Anyone was welcome to that. And we talked about what to do when and if we're funded, individually or collectively. And we came up with some great ideas of things that we could do in our own communities, each and every one of us, right? And think about if at the state level, we were looking at that as well. And we would come up with those kinds of ideas to be able to guide our people in our counties when funds become available. So the committees are the engines of our assemblies. And we continually take and are always looking for the business that they need to be doing. Sometimes that's by our own ideas. Sometimes that's driven by the events in our states. And so we go through, and any person that raises their hand can be on the committee. Now, if they're there regularly, then they're a voting member of the committee. But if they're in and out, they're not regular, they can be a non-voting member of the committee. They're just there to observe. Okay? And as your committees begin to develop and mature, you're going to make those decisions of who's in and who's just on the fringe, right? So the most important part is, if we want to be effectual on our committees, we have to be there all the time. We have to be there when they meet. We have to make that commitment to attend and support the committee. So as I said, this is the time of the year that we're getting ready to go ahead and elect our committee chairs. And so those elections should be taking place sometime here in November. Those are internal. That means that they only have to happen within the assemblies where the committees sit. So the General Assembly committees, they say, okay, we've elected Joe, and Joe's going to be our chair. And the assembly takes that slate. They make sure that there's no conflicts of interest. Maybe your assembly vets those chairs. Okay. And they should be vetted. We should know that there's nothing in their background as well. So, and that vetting might not necessarily need a background check, but it is a check through the vetting committee, just to make sure that that person is there and that they have the best interests of the committee and the assembly in mind. Okay. If the committee doesn't have a chair, really that chairman really is just the spokesman for that committee. They're the kind of the organizer, but they're also just the spokesman. So anything that happens in that committee is then reported on by the chairman at the General Assembly or the Jural Assembly or Militia Assembly, International Business Assembly, if you've got yours set up and have enough people to do committees. Otherwise, it's just reported on by the chairman. They just bring the report and say, here it is, and ask for questions at the assembly meeting and make sure that the people are aware of what their committee is working on. It's a simple job. However, it's also important to note that there is no power in a chairman, not even in the General Assembly chairman. The chairman is really there to report what the will of the people is. And if the people voted one way, the chair can come and say, well, I didn't disagree with it, but here's what they did. Doesn't change the vote of the people, right? It's still the will of the people. And so we have a lot of assemblies, where we have some people who think that it's, their job to run and to make the decisions. And that's not correct. The chairs of the committee only report. They only speak what the committee has determined. So they can't change a vote. They can't override a vote. That's not our jurisdiction. It might be in the other jurisdiction, not in our jurisdiction. So understand that it doesn't matter whether you're an assembly chairman or you're a committee chairman. That's really the way it works. There's no power. And in a way, that's good news, right? Because the assembly chairman or the committee chair is only reporting what the will of the people is. Not their will, the will of the people. And so it makes all of us put our pants on one leg at a time, and it makes us all stand on even ground together. Now, that could go to a General Assembly. Let's say it's a General Assembly committee and they really don't like the idea that's being proposed, and they find reasons to say, committee, no, that's not what we want. It's only the General Assembly, the assembly itself, whether that's Jural or Militia, that can override a committee decision. They can say, no, that is not what we want. That is not how this is going to go forward. We, the people, speak, right? So as we're working through our issues, we have to sit back and realize that we have the good of all people involved in our decisions. Not just one faction, not just one side, not one area, but all of the people, okay? So recently we had an International Business Assembly, and we had a guest who attended to observe what we did. And they were absolutely amazed. They said, you actually had a little debate in there, and it was very civil. Here's why I don't agree. This is what this is my experience, or this is my thought in what it is. Or I don't like that word in that document. I think that word needs to be changed. And as we work through the document, okay, what's a better word? Make a suggestion. Somebody say, well, I don't really like that word. It's not exactly what I want. And then somebody would come up with another suggestion. And when we got done, we had a document, right? So that's the way the family table is sometimes, is we sit and we debate that around. As I told you in my childhood. Now, sometimes it's hot. I remember my dad and my oldest brother, who was 12 years older, absolutely at each other's throats, right? It was very passionate. But in the long run, they were still friends when it got over. They could understand each other's points. And they loved playing devil's advocate back and forth with each other. Okay? Sometimes it was more of a game than it was an actual debate or an argument, just to see who could out-logic somebody else. Now, would I advocate that in the middle of our committees? No. And sometimes if I'm going to advocate something like that, I'll let everybody know, hey, I'm going to be devil's advocate. Okay. This is going to be worst case. What do we do if, or, there are other ways of doing this or thinking about this. So, it is important that, we realize that our words, our actions, the way we communicate, it's important. And sometimes we have to clarify ourselves if we're not being clear about what it is. We have to ask if we've given the clarity, right? It's one of the reasons I really encourage in your assembly meetings, especially in your committee meetings, that your cameras are on. I know a lot of people don't like doing that. But look at what we read in someone's face. We read their intent. We read whether or not they're genuine. We read whether they're angry. We read whether they're confused. We read how, maybe they're just having a bad day, and it shows. They're tired. There's something. You can tell that. And so it helps lend to further comprehension of sometimes what they're saying. I always say, to really screw things up, just text message it, right? Because you can't read any of that in a text message. Well, maybe if somebody texts you all caps with, lots of exclamation points and expletives. But it's important. One, that we get to know each other, and two, that we can read all of those social cues that are slowly slipping away. Okay. And committee meetings is even more so important in terms of being able to do that and be productive. Okay. So it is a conversation. Sometimes it's a debate. It shouldn't be a just knockdown, drag out fight, though. Okay. It should be something where we're willing to listen to the other side, their position, their research, their experience, and be able to come to some common ground within our committees. So let's take example right now. You've got the House of Representatives fighting the senators. And I kind of explained this as Anna did last night. They don't want to, they want to dip into somebody else's cookie jar for their money. So if you figure that the House of Representatives is more municipal and they're out of cookies, and the federal government's still holding all the cookies, and you look at the debate that's going on between them and the aggravation, neither one of them want to give in. And the finger pointing and the argument, is it productive? No, not really. Does it obscure the business that they've got to do? Yes, it does. Is it confusing to people? And maybe that's the point. Maybe, very much. Okay. If they just sat down and said, okay, let's be reasonable. What's the reasonable, logical thing that we should be doing with this? What a different world it would be, right? Do we really need to spend the money? Is this really what we're supposed to do, right? So it's really, our committees are really there to parse that out, to get that done, to work on that business, and to come out with solutions for our assembly or programs. Maybe it's education. Maybe we need a new educational program of some sort. There's a need, a new brochure for outreach. Maybe there is, in the banking and treasury, a way to account for certain things. Maybe it's IT. Maybe we've got new ideas to add to whatever it is that we're doing. So, when we come down to it, we have to be cognizant of what the business of each of those committees is. And yes, that's a very corporate term. And Anna says, but we are corporate. We're just not incorporated. Corporate means together, gathered, one purpose. And so, as we move forward, we're going to have that business to do. Government is business. We're not a club. We're not a group. We're not a membership association. We're government. And so as we think about that, we have to think about what it is that we want to do. Just look at the de facto. They're looking for ways to spend our money rather than cut our taxes. And some of that goes into their pockets. Some of that goes into their friends' pockets, comes back to their pockets. And some of it is just a real waste of our money and energy, okay, a time. And so, we can look at their committees. We can look at what our state of is doing or our county of is doing, and then parse out the different categories and businesses that they're doing. I always remind everybody, remember, they got that from us before we went away. So as we look at that and we start to determine our assemblies, how our assemblies look, we need to look at those committees and begin to reset them all up and make plans for how we're going to do those activities, those businesses. And again, it's one of those things where, maybe it's not needed to meet every week. But until you really establish your committees and your assemblies, you're going to need to meet every week. And you're going to need to get those things set up. It's a lot of work. And then it becomes a lot easier. Everybody begins to know and understand what the job is, how to get it done, how to get it communicated, and to move on to the next set of business that's important, right? So with committees, we have to remember that everyone's welcome. Now, if you've got somebody who floats from committee to committee, are they a voting member? Not necessarily. Okay, and that's up to your assemblies to decide who is a voting member, what the conditions for that is. And I'd say one of them is consistent attendance. They've got to know what the issues are before they can vote on them. And they've got to be part of the discussions before they can vote on it. So that's going to be up to your assembly to determine what determines a committee member. So it's one of those discussions that your assembly has to decide and do. Now, as your assemblies are learning, that may not be possible. Okay? They may float around. They may be in and out of committees for a while. And then you're going to find that you've got a core group, 3, 5 people that pretty much settle into that particular committee. Those are your voting members, right? So, so as you go forward with this, realize that our committees are the ones that do the work. Our committees are the ones that drive. They're the engines of your assemblies. And they're the ones, the chairmen are the ones that go back and report at the various assembly meetings, the business meetings, and they give kind of a condition of what's going on and what the programs are and how you're going to do it and what needs to be done. If there's any decisions that the assembly has to do as a whole. So, go back and review the committees, the standing committees of our assemblies on the 4 pillars and committees, talks in the first 10 of the series, and get familiar with those committees. Think about writing a scope of what those committees are supposed to be doing. What's their purpose? The description of the committee. And, begin to gather the people that have expertise in those areas. And even if they don't have expertise, if they have interest, it's a whole lot easier to teach them, right? If they have interest in that committee. Invite them. Listen for keys. oh, so and so, they sound like they would be a great match for outreach. Or, you know, Ted over there, Ted might be great on the orientation team. Um, Jeff over there, he's really good at education. He knows an awful lot. Maybe he would be willing to participate in our education committee. So and so was hey, they worked in bookkeeping, and that's their education, um and it's been their profession, and they really like that. Maybe they'd be a perfect fit for our banking and treasury team. You know, talk about banking and treasury. Could be an audit team, could be an audit committee. Eventually, there may be a brick and mortar bank committee. There may be a budget committee. There may be a training within Treasury. So there's lots of possibilities that we can branch out to. We just need to get to the point where we have the overall committees done, and then you can start branching into specialty committees or special purpose committees or subcommittees of those standing committees. Okay? So I hope that helps a lot with forming committees. No, committee members do not need to be vetted. All right? They just need to be willing volunteers. Um, and um, and they need to be active. That's all we're asking. Be active, be there, be consistent, and a committee should meet at least once a month. Even if there's not a whole lot of business, even for the discussion, you're going to find that maybe sometimes you will come up with the topics that you're going to attend in the next month. So make sure you're there. Half of the battle is just showing up. It really is. So we got a couple questions, and I'm going to take a couple questions. I hope you'll ask some more questions. So I put this one up. It says, Lisa, thank you for this question. Is it in our American tradition to have a General Assembly Speaker Chair also be volunteering or elected to be an IBA chair? Well, early on, I asked Anna about that. And each assembly is supposed to have an independent chair. The General Assembly is kind of the overall over the top of the sub-assemblies, which international business is a sub-assembly, jural, and militia assemblies. And the work is going to get to the point where you're not going to be able to have time to be an assembly chair on either side. To begin with, some of our assemblies we don't have different chairs to step up into those positions. If everybody's busy, somebody doesn't want to necessarily be an assembly chairman. So the job of that, unfortunately, falls to the General Assembly chairman to be acting pro tem, meaning for the time being. That's what pro tem means. And acting, meaning that they have the ability to act and call the assembly together. But in the same time, that acting pro tem chair should be asking for a chairman to step up. Because eventually, in the business of the assembly, a General Assembly chairman is going to be extremely busy in the overall business of the assembly. It is their job to make sure that overall assembly is moving forward, that it's working, that it's producing. And so they're kind of they're the conductor of the orchestra. But you have a lead on the tuba section, you have a lead on the flute section, you have a lead on the string section. Those are your assembly chairmen. There's the ones that make sure that their assembly stays together. and they work in conjunction, in concert with the General Assembly chairman. So no, you should not have an elected, they have to take a choice. That they either are General Assembly chairman or they're International Business Assembly chairman. But in the meantime, while you're waiting for somebody to step up, they very well could get stuck with an acting position that way. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as they can keep up with the business of that, until an actual chairman does step up and raise their hand. Okay. So I hope that helps. And again, our chairman of our assemblies don't set direction. They don't actually set the business. They may suggest the business, but they're there to make sure that the assembly keeps moving forward in whatever the business is that has been identified by the assembly. They can't override a decision. They can't make a decision on their own. The committees do that for them. Okay? And do it in conjunction with them. Now, those assembly chairmen do work with and through the General Assembly chairman, because eventually they'll have issues that they have to bring to General Assembly. All right? And that keeps the whole thing cohesive, moving together in the same direction, not this one over there and that one over there, because the sub-assemblies are not independent. They do function somewhat independently, but they're not independent from the General Assembly. Okay? All right, I hope that answers the question. All right, here's another one. So, does each state assembly decide the requirements to join the assembly, such as numbers of hard copies of status correction paperwork needs to be on file? Should this information go to all ASNs? So let's start with the first one. Everyone is permitted to change their status and join an assembly. Your General Assembly should be all the people on your state. No exceptions. Anna is in the past, and in her very direct way, said even the assholes are part of your assembly. And so, you know, we're not supposed to be vetting people, holding people out of our assemblies, or putting extraordinary requirements other than their status correction to be in our assemblies. It is the voice of the people that our assemblies are representing, hearing, working, moving on. Okay? So when we do our paperwork, there just needs to be one set of paperwork in a master file on our assembly. And no, not everybody has access to all of that information necessarily. In fact, in the past, many assemblies have suffered from people who got disaffected, went rogue, and then took that paperwork and or email list and went out and used it incorrectly. Our privacy is worth something. That's why we're here. We're not commercial entities to be bought and sold and passed around at the whim of somebody for their purpose. So paperwork is there. Recording secretary or secretaries would have access to it. Records keeper. Maybe the state assembly chairman, the General Assembly chairman, and the militia commander should have access to at least a roster at the very least. Okay. If they need more information, that's where they go through the records keeper. That's the job of the records keeper, to be able to provide or deny that information. Now on Ohio, if you ask me for the telephone number of so-and-so, I might have it. But I might not give it to you because I don't have their permission to give it to you. All right. So I would have to go back and ask permission of them to be able to give their email or their telephone number out. Okay. And that's respect of our private information and our people. Okay. Some people complain about that. I get it. But as a committee chairman, you should be gathering the email and the contact information of the people on your committee so that you can communicate with them, right? If you need to send an email out to them, you have it. You don't have to go through anybody else, and you have their permission then to communicate with them. So it is, even though we don't have privacy laws, we try to honor each person's private nature on our assemblies. So there really only needs to be one hard copy, and that's in a master file situation. And then we have on our LROs the digital files to look up. Okay, so realize that's not necessarily, unless the assembly votes something like that, and it better be the entire General Assembly, all of your people, all of your status corrected people. Okay, all right. I hope that answers that question. Okay, the definition of incorporated. I'm going to look that one up real quick so I can give you a Webster's kind of dictionary description. So its formal definition is the term incorporated refers to the process of legally, let's talk about language, legally forming a corporation, which is a separate entity from its owners. This process involves filing documents with the state to establish the business as a legal entity, allowing it to do its own assets, incur debts, and have legal obligations independent of its owners. An incorporated business provides limited liability protection, meaning the personal assets of the owners are generally protected from business liabilities. Okay. So the difference between being incorporated means the state of basically takes part of and is in your business. They have a vested interest, and they protect your liability, your personal assets, by separating the liability and protecting the name of the business. For that, you pay business taxes with. That's what they do, because that's their basic share of whatever your productivity is. Now, it separates the owner from the business. And when we refer to incorporated state versus corporate state, meaning the state assemblies, the people are not separated from their business. It means that we have a vested interest solely in our state business, right? And we don't have any other entity or fictional entity that is doing business as us. It's us, the people, right out front, telling you what we want, what we don't want. Okay? So, so that's really the difference. If we had a separation, we wouldn't have as much investment in our state's assemblies, just as the state of Ohio or state of New York, their employees are just employees. They have really no, as long as they get their paycheck, what do they care, right? They have no vested interest in it. Okay. All right. Regarding the next one is regarding positions that are elected by the General Assembly. Who makes up the General Assembly? Is it everyone in the General Assembly since everyone is a potential juror? Well, that's somewhat true, but you're going to find that not everybody's going to want to participate in the General Assembly. In fact, we have particular sections of our people on Ohio, our Amish, who will never be in our General Assembly because they do not believe in holding court, okay, punishment in that way. They do that within their own community when they have someone, but they don't go out and judge what they call judge other people. So we know that they're going to already not participate in the General Assembly. They still deserve to be status corrected. They can still be a member of our assemblies and be in the business, but they can deny. We have no compulsion in any of our assemblies. We cannot commit someone to be a juror. We can't compel them, okay? So for the most part, in the General Assembly, we have those members who are there in the invested. And we have to remember that the General Assembly is the organizational component of our court. They're kind of the background of what goes on. They're back there getting together the jury pool of all of the eligible people. They make the invitations to do jury duty, not the summons, but the invitation. And there's a difference in the words, right? Summons says you're going to appear. An invitation says, would you like to appear? Okay, would you like to be a juror? And so our jury pool committee of our General Assembly, they're the ones that do that activity. They gather the pool of jurors together, and they start getting people who are willing to raise their hand and be a juror. The venue committee, they're the ones that make sure that if we're going to have a physical trial somewhere, that they have a venue, a building, a place, a meeting room or meeting rooms, a courthouse or whatever to meet in. And they're going to take and then make sure that all of the creature comforts for our jurors and our justice and court clerk, that they all have everything they need to conduct court in that area. That's their job. Land patent committees are there to make sure that they lawfully set up the office and are there to set up for the operations of a land patent office. So in that, everything is there for the organization that needs to go into the lawful services of our assemblies. And some of that is actually transfers over to the court and then affects the way the court operates. So venue and jury pool specifically in that way. Okay. So anybody that has status corrected is eligible for our assembly or for being a juror. And depending on the case, it may or may not be someone who has to be an ASC. So if it's an international case, something between two different people in two different counties, if it's the state state assembly versus the state of Ohio, then it would need to be somebody who is a citizen eligible. Somebody has no conflicts, no LLCs, no contracts with the government, okay, no licenses. So it really depends on each one. But yeah, essentially anybody in the General Assembly could be asked to be a juror along the way, picked to be a juror. But again, they're invited, not compelled to be there. And they can certainly decline. They don't have to have a reason. Okay. All right. All right. Another one. Is there a step-by-step for a lawful conversion of, for instance, my village of Los Ranchos to Los Ranchos Village? So that's going to take some doing, because I'm going to tell you that my situation in the summer is I live on a little island, and half of the island is township, unincorporated township. The downtown district, which is very commercial, is incorporated village. And it's very interesting because the incorporated village is underwater, bankrupt, over its head, steeped in debt. Okay. And the unincorporated township is actually not. They live within their means. They have plenty to operate on. And there's a big fight between one who provides the security services. The township had to go and hire particularly extra sheriff assistance, because most of the sheriff is on the mainland. We're on an island. So they have to have a sheriff that lives, and we have to pay for that. They have to pay for that through the township. And the sheriff activity in the township, sometimes they need 2 or 3. So as the summer months swell. But the township lives in its budget, whereas the village can't and won't. And they don't like having the sheriff on the island, because the sheriff in our jurisdiction is the top dog. They're the watchful eyes over the police chiefs, right? And so it sets up this dynamic between the two, so that the village now wants the township to become part of the village. And what they want is basically the township to pay off the village debt. So the people in the township go, no, thanks. We don't want to buy into that. And the people in the village are like, well, hey, why don't they just the township and we unincorporate? And the village is going, oh my God, no, we can't do that. We lose federal funding. We lose state of Ohio funding. We lose all of these things because they put all this carrot out there and all these regulations, of course, to go with it. And now we lose all that funding on top of being bankrupt. Okay. They're afraid to lose the cookies out of the cookie jar. All right. So that's the fight that you have between unincorporated and incorporated businesses in a microcosm in the way you're speaking of. Village of being like state of is more or less, it is incorporated. And you would have to get people to vote down that incorporation, which also means they lose state funding, they lose federal funding, and they have to self-fund. Now, maybe that's not such a bad thing. We find that on the township, that's not a bad thing, right? It's only a bad thing if you live in the village, because you pay additional taxes there besides, all right? So that's the classic struggle, Margaret, between one and the other. Okay. All right. Well, we've come down to the end of questions. We've been an hour. And so I'm going to leave this here, and we'll see where we end up next week. Hopefully Anna will have time to come and be with us and talk. And we'll continue on our learning. Get your questions ready. So, let's talk about the mechanics of and some of the issues that we're having in setting up our assemblies. Besides people, what are our mechanical questions to move our assemblies further towards full standing and seatment. So I'll see you all next week. Make it a good week. All right. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.